In the summer of 1792, deep inside a limestone cave in the hills of Jamaica, a British surveyor recorded something he could not explain. Carved from dark wood, a small figure with a twisted, screaming face sat alone in the black, and across its cheeks, running down into the dust beneath it, were fresh streaks of water. The men who guided him into that cave refused to step any closer. They called the figure a cemí. They said it was weeping, and they told him that whatever made it cry was still down there in the dark, watching all of them. For more than 500 years, people across Jamaica have repeated the same impossible story: ancient idols, hidden in the island's caves, that appear to weep. Some insist it is only rainwater seeping through the rock. Some say it is the cold stone sweating in the island heat. But the people who have actually stood in front of these carvings tell a very different story. They talk about the sound that comes first. They talk about the sudden drop in temperature. And they talk about the certainty deep in the gut that the thing in front of them is not hollow, and never was. This is the story of the weeping cemís of Jamaica, and it is a mystery that no historian, no archaeologist, and no priest has ever managed to close. Before we go into the caves, do one thing for me. If you are the kind of person who wants the true history buried underneath the legend, the parts the guidebooks quietly leave out, subscribe now. Every week, we go deep into the forgotten stories of the Caribbean, the ones that never made it into any textbook. Now let's go back to the very beginning, centuries before that surveyor ever set foot on the island. Long before Jamaica had that name, it belonged to a people who called it Jamaica, the land of wood and water. The Taíno arrived by canoe more than 1,000 years ago, moving island to island up the great chain of the Caribbean until they reached this one. They built villages along the rivers, they farmed cassava, they fished the coast, and they carved. They carved constantly, into wood, into stone, into shell and bone. And what they carved above all else were the cemís. A cemí was not a decoration, and it was not a toy. To the Taíno, a cemí was a spirit that had been given a body. It could hold the soul of an ancestor, the power of a god, or a force of nature that had been coaxed into sitting still inside the wood. Some were small enough to close your hand around. Others were carved directly into the living rock of the caves. The three-pointed ones held the power of the land itself, the same power that shook the ground and fed the crops. And the Taíno believed that once a cemí was finished, it was awake. It had to be fed. It had to be spoken to by name. And if it was neglected, or insulted, or abandoned, it could turn on the people who made it. The feeding was not a small thing either. On the most important nights, a priest would prepare a sacred powder, grind it fine, and breathe it in through a carved tube until the walls of the cave seemed to move on their own. In that state, hovering between waking and dreaming, he believed he could hear the cemís speak. He would offer them the first of the cassava harvest. He would clean their carved faces with his own hands. He would say their names out loud so the spirits inside would never feel forgotten. This was the bargain at the very heart of the religion. The people cared for the cemís, and in return, the cemís watched over the people. It was a relationship, and like any relationship, it could be broken. To understand why the idols ended up in the caves at all, you have to understand what caves meant to these people. They were not simply holes in the mountains. They were doorways. In the Taíno creation story, the first human beings did not fall from the sky or rise out of the sea. They climbed up into the world out of a cave. The sun and the moon were born from a cave too. So to the Taíno, a cave was the exact border between the world of the living and the world below. And they treated it the way you treat a door that can open from both sides. You can still see the proof of how seriously they took this. On the walls of a cave along the mountain river in the island's southeast, painted figures crowd the stone. Humans, birds, frogs in shapes that no one has ever fully decoded. Some of them more than 1,000 years old. Researchers believe it was a ceremonial site, a place where the living came to stand at the doorway and look through to the other side. These were not idle scribbles. They were a record of a people in conversation with the dead. And the deeper caves, the ones with no paintings, no daylight, and no easy way in, were reserved for something far more serious than art on a wall. That is why the most sacred cemís were never kept in the villages. They were carried deep underground, into total darkness, and set down in the places where the two worlds pressed against each other. Priests, called bahiks, would go into those caves alone to speak with the spirits, to heal the sick, and to ask the cemís what was coming for their people. And according to the fragments of the stories that survived, sometimes the cemís answered them. Then, in the year 1494, the ships came. Christopher Columbus reached Jamaica on his second voyage across the Atlantic, and from that moment, everything the Taíno had built began to unravel. Within a single generation, disease, forced labor, and open violence tore through the population. Hundreds of thousands of people were ground down to almost nothing. Whole villages fell silent, and the bahiks, the only ones who knew the words that kept the cemís calm, who knew how to feed them and how to speak their names, died far faster than they could pass that knowledge on to anyone else. And so the idols were left behind. When the Spanish did find the cemís, they saw only devils staring back at them. Priests ordered the carvings smashed, burned, and thrown into the sea. But there is one thing you cannot easily do. You cannot drag out a carving that sits half a mile inside a mountain, in a cave that the local people flatly refuse to enter. So the deepest cemís, the oldest and the most hallowed ones, were never taken. They were simply sealed in the dark and left there, unfed, unspoken to, forgotten by almost everyone alive. Almost everyone. And this is where the legend of the weeping truly begins. Because the Taíno did not disappear as completely as the history books once claimed. They mixed with others, they hid in the deep interior, and they carried their oldest stories down through the generations in pieces. One of those pieces, repeated again and again in the districts closest to the old caves, was a warning. A cemí that is neglected grieves. Left alone in the dark, with no one to feed it and no one left to speak its name, the spirit trapped inside begins to weep. And a weeping cemí, the elders always said, is not sorrowful. It is enraged. For a long time, this was only a story, the kind told to frighten children away from the mouths of dangerous caves. Then people began stumbling onto the idols for themselves, and the idols were wet. The earliest written account we can trace is that surveyor in the 1790s, marking boundaries for the colonial government in the hills of the interior. His notes described the streaks of water on the carved face and the flat refusal of his guides to go near it. He assumed, as most reasonable men would, that water was simply dripping from the ceiling. But when he raised his lantern, the stone above the idol was dry, only the face was wet. Through the 1800s, the reports kept surfacing, always from the same stretch of cave country in the island's rugged interior, the tangle of sinkholes and hidden chambers that would come to be known as the cockpit country. The men and women who had escaped slavery and built free communities in that terrain knew the caves better than anyone alive, and they left the deepest ones well enough alone. When they spoke of the carved figures at all, they spoke of them the same way every time. Do not touch the ones that cry. In the 1930s, as the story goes, a small survey party went looking for one of these caves on purpose, hoping to carry an idol out for a museum collection. They found the chamber. They found the carving, low against the far wall, its face slick and glistening in the lamplight. One of the men reached out to lift it. The account says the lamps went out, all of them, all at once, with no breath of wind to explain it, and that the men abandoned everything, the tools, the lamps, the idol, and clawed their way back toward the surface, in the pitch dark. Not one of them would return the next day. The carving, as far as anyone knows, is still exactly where they left it. By the 1970s, as tourism grew and outsiders began pushing further into the show caves, a new kind of account started to appear, this time from the guides themselves. One story, told by more than one man who led those tours, described a chamber that was quietly dropped from every route. The official reason was loose rock. The real reason, according to the guides, was a small carved figure set into a natural alcove that nobody remembered placing there. And that was always damp. Tourists who drifted toward it came back describing the same handful of things. A smell like wet earth and old smoke. A pressure in the ears, the kind you feel just before a storm breaks. And once, according to the guide who told it most often, A small child on the tour stopped, stared at the little wet face in the wall, and asked her mother why the man in the stone was so sad. There is one more account, more recent than the others, and harder to wave away. In the early 2000s, a pair of amateur cavers went looking for a chamber an old farmer had described to them, somewhere in the folds of the cockpit country. They found it, and they found the figure too, no taller than a forearm, its face carved into a grimace and shining with moisture in the beam of their headlamps. One of them, so the story goes, wiped the face completely dry with his sleeve, curious, wanting to prove to himself that it was only ordinary condensation. Then he stepped back to watch, and within a minute, in the still, sealed air of that chamber, the tears returned. 2 clean lines of water, forming on dry stone, running down a face that had no source of water, above it, behind it, or anywhere near it. They did not stay to see what came next. Neither of them has ever said publicly exactly where that cave is. The reports never really stopped. Farmers clearing new land near old sinkholes would find a small stone face at the back of a hollow, wet to the touch on a bone-dry day, and quietly wall it back up rather than carry it home. And there is a single thread that runs through nearly every one of these accounts, no matter the decade. It is the sound. People describe a low sound that reaches them before they ever see the carving. Not quite a moan, not quite the wind. Something closer to a person crying in another room, heard faintly through a wall in a place where there is no other room and no other person for miles in any direction. So what is actually happening in these caves? The obvious explanation is the one the surveyor reached for first: water. Limestone caves are wet places, and Jamaica is riddled with them. Moisture condenses on cool stone, and a carved face with deep hollows for eyes could easily collect and channel that water into streaks that look exactly like tears. On a carving of the right shape, in a cave of the right temperature, condensation alone could account for a great deal of the weeping. That is the answer most geologists would give you, and for many of these idols it is almost certainly the correct one. But the water theory has a hole in it, and the surveyor found that hole first. If condensation is running down the face, the rock above the face should be wet as well. In more than one account, it simply isn't. The ceiling is dry. The walls are dry. Only the carving weeps. Condensation does not behave that way, and condensation does not explain the cold, or the failing lamps, or the sound that reaches people before they have even turned the final corner. The second explanation is the human one. Our brains are pattern machines, built to find faces and feelings in everything, especially in the dark, especially when we are already afraid, and especially when someone has just told us that the thing in the cave is watching us. A guide who whispers that the idol weeps has already half created the tears before you ever lay eyes on the stone. Fear does the rest. It sharpens every stray drip into a sob and every faint draft into a presence. A great deal of this legend, without any doubt, lives inside the minds of the people carrying the lanterns into the dark. And yet, there is a third way of looking at all of this, and it does not belong to the geologists or the psychologists. It belongs to the Taíno themselves. To them, the question was never, how does the stone make water? To them, the cemí was alive, and a living thing that has been abandoned in the dark for 500 years, cut off from everyone who ever loved it, or feared it, or fed it, has every reason in the world to weep. Seen that way, the tears are not a puzzle to be solved. They are a message. The message is grief. The grief is a warning, and the warning is very simple. You forgot us. You sealed us in the dark, and we are still here. You do not have to believe any of that to feel the weight of it, because underneath the ghost story, there is a real and far larger tragedy. An entire people, the first people of this island, were very nearly erased from the earth. Their language was broken apart. Their gods were thrown into the sea. Their names were taken from them. And the only thing many of them managed to leave behind were these small carved faces, hidden in the one place the invaders could not easily follow, waiting in the dark for someone to come back and speak to them again. And Jamaica is not alone in this. Across the wider Caribbean, in the caves of Hispaniola, in the sinkholes of the Bahamas, in the green hills of Puerto Rico, the same kinds of carvings sit in the same kind of dark, and the same kinds of stories cling to them. Wherever the Taíno world was broken, the cemís were left behind. And wherever the cemís were left behind, people eventually began to whisper that the oldest ones weep. Either an entire region invented the exact same ghost story on its own, which is possible, or all of these carvings are echoing the same real event. The end of a world, remembered by the only witnesses who could never be fully silenced, because they were never quite alive to begin with. Or so we like to tell ourselves. Maybe that is all the weeping cemís really are. Not haunted, just abandoned. The last witnesses to a world that was destroyed, still sitting in the caves where they were left, wet-faced in the lamplight, refusing to be forgotten by a world that moved on without them. Or maybe the elders were right the whole time, and there is something down there in the deep chambers of the cockpit country that has not finished grieving and does not care to be disturbed, because the people who live closest to those caves, the ones who have heard the sound and felt the cold and seen the tears with their own eyes, have never once needed a scientist to explain it to them. They made their decision generations ago, and they have not changed it. They leave the weeping ones alone. If this story pulled you in, there are hundreds more just like it buried across these islands, waiting for someone to dig them back up. Subscribe, and next week we go looking for the next one. The Caribbean hoards its secrets deep, and the deepest of them still lie down in the dark.